It's high for bees, really. Slightly unkind on them at times. Even just half a mile away down at Newbigin in the valley floor there, it would be a much kinder place for them, but a lot of the pleasure I get from them is watching them. And if they're not at home, you don't get the chance to watch them very much. We've got a lot of really nice hay meadows still left here. We've got a lot of the pasture land on these hillsides. There's lots of vetches and bits and pieces on them. You know, there's a real good mix of things here, as well as some nice bits of woodland. It's not extensive woodland as such, but there's enough to give the bees a real good crop of stuff from a variety of things. Willow quite early. We're also in quite close proximity to celandine, coltsfoot, some of the, what I would consider anyway, the really early stuff in the wildflower sense. And, you know, I'm far enough away from any of what I consider to be the not very nice stuff like oilseed rape in that respect. You know, my bees are so far away from it, they'll just, you know, I never get polluted with anything like that. Because I'm not really wanting too much back out of it, there are years here where I've had almost, or quite literally, nothing. You feed them and feed them and feed them, and whatever they manage to bring in, they struggle to get through some of these really horrible summers. And at the end of the day, you've just given them 6 or 8 or 10 very large bags of sugar and had nothing back. The upside of it is every now and again you get a really good one and you lift 2 nice large boxes of full frames off them at the end of the year. The job I do, I'm a gamekeeper. I'm rather philosophical about nature and the weather and everything. You know, after plenty of years at it, either lifting you up or dumping you down, you have to get a bit like that. The very most I ever had was 3, and a lot of the time I ran with 1, but I found that has let me down a time or two, because if you've only got 1 and it goes wrong on you, very often by the time you realise it's gone wrong, especially with a short summer up here, to try and put it right, it takes nearly a month for these bees to get themselves turned round. And if it goes wrong at the wrong time of year, you haven't got that month of really good breeding weather to get a good strong colony to go into the winter again.
I've been keeping bees for the best part of 30 years, I think. We bought a ruin of a cottage up in Weardale, and I keep my bees up there. Where there's no neighbours to annoy, and whilst it's on the limit of viability for keeping bees, it's about 1,000 feet above sea level, and the season, the spring starts later and autumn starts earlier. If we do get a good summer, it's ideal conditions for bees because there's no arable crops, it's just hay meadows, there's no fertilizers used, no insecticides used, so you get some really good honey, and indeed my honey tends to win first prize at all the local agricultural shows, not because I'm a decent beekeeper, but because the foraging for the bees is ideal, plenty of wildflowers. Bees tend to favour one particular flower whilst it's in bloom. They don't spread themselves over the whole of the flowers that are out. They home in on one particular species, and once that stops producing nectar, they'll find another species and home in on that one. The weather plays such an important part at the top end of the dale that often early in the year you've got to supplement the nectar by feeding them sugar solution, otherwise they would die of starvation. But there are quite a lot of sycamore trees that grow along the riverbank and the burn, which whilst the flower isn't particularly conspicuous to us, it produces quite a lot of nectar. It's a green flower, that's why you don't notice it much, and it produces a yellowy greeny honey, which is quite flavoursome. And then later on in the year, it's the meadow flowers that the bees forage on. There's a tremendous variety of flowers in with the grass in the traditional hay meadows, which haven't been treated with artificial fertiliser to enhance the grass to the detriment of the flowers. There is a financial incentive for farmers in the Upper Dale to keep on making hay in the traditional manner, and that's good for people who keep bees. I tend to get my honey during the months of mid-June till the end of July is a sort of peak period. There's still forage after the end of July. There's quite a bit of roseberry willow herb grows on the riverbanks, and I'll see the bees on that. But the honey that I get after the end of July, I tend to leave on the hives to see the bees over the winter. Some people take all the honey off and then start to feed them with the sugar solution to give them enough stocks for the winter. But I think natural honey is better for them, and as I said, we're on the verge of viability over there, so you don't like take too many liberties. You need to give the bees the best chance that they can.
That's the highlight of the year, is they go into heather. You have to find a farmer who's interested. Heather honey is a premium crop and you get far more money for it. But it's only a very short season, very short, 3 or 4 weeks at the outside. And if you get rain all the time, you suddenly get nothing. End of August to September, it depends on the year, you know. But it's got to be nice and warm. The heather's got to be out in full bloom. And you can smell the heather, you know. It's got to be a sea of blue. You make arrangements with the farmer and you say, I'll be up so and so. You wait for the fine morning, get your wife out. It's not 6 o'clock, it's nearer 7 o'clock. So we'll get there, and then got your spot where you're going to put the hives. You take the car as near as you can, and you unload the hives onto the spot where the bees are. And then I say to my wife, and you get in the car and drive away as far as you like, because you have to block the entrances up, you see, with foam stuff. And then when you pull it out, they're all joggled up and they shoot out, you know. I thought it was rather good, but Amy was terrified. Then nothing happens. They keep flying around the place to get the bearings, you see. Seem a bit lost at first, and they're a bit tetchy, as you call them. If you get too near, it gets stung, you know, because they're upset. I mean, you've had them in the back of a car getting joggled for half an hour or more, and they're bound to be a bit worried about it. So give them a while, you let them settle down, then you go back again in a few days' time and gingerly take the lid off, make sure are they all right. And then after that, you just go every week, see how much honey they've got. You never go into a hive with the heather without gloves on, because you get stung if you do. You can't take liberties at all when they're at the heather. You've got to be very careful. You never can tell. Some days you go and it's a lovely fine morning, and there's something happens. There's a different smell of something, and they suddenly go mad. The only thing to do with it is pack everything up and go away and come back another day. You got to realise when you got to give up. You see, you can't battle against the bees, because the bees will win. And then the time comes when you think, well, I've got to bring them back now. The heather's gone over, and if you leave them too long, they'll start eating the honey, which you don't want. That you want to sell the honey, make a bit of profit. You then you get up early one morning before they're flying, and put the wedges in. There's foam strips you put in the front. If you wait till they start flying, you leave them half them behind, so you don't lose your bees. You know, it's quite the thing. You bring them back and you try not to look at them for a few days till they get settled down, because they're a bit unhappy. And that's the only time I wear gloves is beekeeping. When you bring it back from the heather, they have a different buzz. If they have a contented buzz, you can see the sound content. But when they come back to the heather, they sound angry. You know, it takes them a while to settle down, and that's more or less the end of the year.
So the story begins in 1962, when I was commissioned to design a parish church in St Leonards-on-Sea for the Roman Catholic Church. I'm not a Roman Catholic, but I was an architect then, and so it was a chance of a lifetime to build this parish church. And because I was a young man and full of the venom of architecture, I decided that it was going to be pretty radical. So after a lot of false starts, I eventually came up with this very radical building, and because of its design, I wanted an engineer who would know and feel about the building the way I did. His name was Jimmy, and he came up with eventually a structural solution which was not too different from the Forth Bridge and was entirely inappropriate for my building. So I gave him a pretty good ticking off and said, go back and scrap everything you've done, try to get inside my building and see if you can come up with a more acceptable proposal. 10 days later, he sent me through the post a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People, and I took that as a fairly serious hint as to that I'd probably upset him. And then there was a terrible silence for about a fortnight and no design came forward, but he drove up in his then quite large Daimler and opened the boot, and in the boot was a beehive. And I said, what are you doing with this beehive, Jimmy? He said, I've come to give it to you, John, because I think it might improve your manners and your general attitude to life, which at the moment is a bit spiky. So he put this beehive in our back garden. I was then married to Diana and we had one son. And he got a white sheet out of the boot, walked into the back garden, put a little tray in front of the hive and shook all these bees onto the tray. And of course they all walked in as they do. And to me that was miraculous. I thought, well, that's got to be one of the most interesting things I've ever seen.
My first recollection of an introduction to bees, I think, was when I was about 5 or 6 years old as an evacuee during the war. And I was dressed up in a bee suit and a veil and told, stand there, put your hands in your pocket and don't move. And the young lady concerned opened up the hive, and I remember this overpowering, beautiful aroma of smell that came out from the hive. And I don't remember, of course, exactly how long it lasted, maybe only 20 minutes, half an hour or so. But I think it had a long-lasting impression. And it was then when I went to Africa as an agricultural officer. I was living on the edge of the Kalahari Desert in a place called Mahalapi. And another agricultural officer said that he had been involved in bees in UK. He said, why don't we try and keep bees here in Mahalapi? So the next thing to do was order up a hive from South Africa, and they sent up a couple of hives. And then, of course, we had to acquire some bees. Now, this was more of a problem because the bees there were no beekeepers in the area, obviously. And it meant going into the bush, finding a colony of bees, and then taking them and hiving them. It was quite interesting the way we acquired our bees. We went to a water hole. Bees were coming for water. And so we noticed which way they were flying off and guessed that there must be a colony somewhere in that direction. And what we did was made up sugar solution, captured maybe 20, 30 bees that were coming for water, and then quickly went onto the sugar solution, and then moved it 300 or 400 yards in the direction of which they were flying. We did this 2 or 3 times until we found a colony of bees in a hollow tree. And then, of course, the fun really started because African or Southern African bees are much more aggressive than bees in Europe. Anyway, we eventually took the colony and took them home and hived them. And that was how I got started in Africa. That would have been, would guess, about 1967, something like that. Right.
A bait hive. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, I do. I'm just making a site now up the common there, and in an old disused quarry, and I have occasionally seen a swarm there. And so I just put in a level spot up there, put an old pallet down and put a beehive on the top of it, like, you know. And if there's one going that way, they'll go into it, like, if we put a bit of wax in and whatever, you know, and it smells dry and it smells of wax and bees, and you'll nearly sure get a swarm eventually out of it, like. I got one last year, actually, which was the most interesting one I've had for a lot of years. And it was on at the old school there, this year's school. A lot of old sapling trees growing up round the gate. But they're awful high, they're probably about 15 foot high, these saplings. And there's a swarm right at the top, like, of course it would have to be at the top, wouldn't it? And I then come home for the ladder. I went, a chap reported it to me, and I went along and had a look, and had no car, of course, a push bike with panniers on, of course. and so I went to have a look, and I said I didn't come home for the ladder, because Pat will go mad, me going up a ladder, like, you know. So I've been known to fall off them, like, you know. And anyway, what the heck am I going to do with this? So I'm going to get it out. I didn't want to leave it, like, and because it was such a big one, it was a beauty, it was. And so your mates are never here when you want them. And so a chap that runs around, he got my job actually on hard water when I finished, and he runs around with a Land Rover. And I said, he's never here when you want him, like, you know. I'm thinking to myself, do you know, it's like some of the, I don't know, it's just a miracle. He'd come around the flipping corner. He could have been anywhere between Ullswater and Top of Shap Fell, he could have been, honestly. And he popped round the corner with his Land Rover, and I said, back your Land Rover up here, David. I said, I want to use it to stand on to get this swarm of bees. I couldn't repeat it to anybody, no, the language had come out, like, you know, and I said, never mind with a lot of swearing. I said, just back Land Rover up there. And I said, no, I just want to use it to stand on to get this swarm of bees. So it's a lovely grid on top, a brand new Land Rover, lovely grid on top. And where you say you couldn't really fall off, like, you know. And so I got up top of there, gave the tree a right good check into the box, and we got a good half of them. And then I just took the box to the back of the wall, and you should have seen them all going in like little soldiers, like, you know. Brilliant. What a feeling it was, that. Super. Anyhow, David still swearing, because his Land Rover was black with bees, wasn't it? I said, well, if you park up just round the corner there, I said, they'll all leave Land Rover and go back to where they swarmed, like, you know. Anyway, we did that, and they stopped there for about 10 minutes, and they went back. And by night, they'd all gone into the box. So, yeah, everybody was happy, especially me, because when I put them in the hive, they were crowded on 10 brood frames, they were crowded on them. So it was a swarm that was probably worth in excess of 150 quid, like, really, you know, so. But if I'd caught going up that ladder, I would have been in trouble.
To make bits and pieces for a lady and gentleman who kept bees, just for the beehives, because I was quite handy with my hands. I decided one day I'd have a look with them in the bees, but I hadn't got a veil. And they just used the black hat veils, and I made myself one out of perforated zinc, you know, the stuff you put on a meat safe. Stitched it to a hat, bit of cloth down, took it out of his coat. So we got amongst the bees, and we both bent down together. A little perforation on the top of my veil caught in his. We both lost our veils. I ended up with 7 stings around my chin. I thought, that's me finished, but I had to be back in again. So that was the first episode. And the same people, she used to just wear a skirt when she was beekeeping. A long coat and a skirt. The old milking coat, as they called them. And she'd be working away, and she'd set up for a laugh and walk away. Come back later, she said, they always get us a moved stocking top. Well, the wallpaper stripper, it's just steam clean them, really. We got a wallpaper stripper out of Aldi, and I decided I would use it just as a steam cleaner. I still use it for melting my wax with and such like. I just put it in a barrel and put steam into it. That's all, and let it run through the... I was thinking this time about putting my wax in a set of Jones old tights and hang it. letting it, steam it, because steam's hotter than water, boiling water, isn't it? Our fridge is for storing stuff in, but it's bee-proof, wax moth-proof, and it doesn't allow the frost in quite as quickly, the cold air in quite as quickly. Yeah, just the freezer, the big freezer, it holds quite a few, is it 8 supers. And I can put a light bulb in the freezer compartment, and it keeps the temperature, keeps them from granulating until I have time to extract them, and it also extracts a lot quicker, easier. I've got a thermostat in, but I can't remember what I've set that at now. As long as I keep them dry, I do put a sheet of, not on every hive, but a sheet of polystyrene under the lid sometimes, just to stop condensation mainly. Give them a load of food at back end, and I'm actually giving them a little bit of fondant at the moment, some of them that are a bit short.
I used to drive my car onto the moss. It's like a bowl of porridge with a hard crust on top, and we had really dry summers and never had a problem getting stuck. So I drove on this night. I was just on my own, and I was putting more supers on. Put the supers on the hives, gets in the car, and I thought I'll drive back in the tracks that I've driven on, so as I know that's safe enough. Driving along, and then all of a sudden, bang! The front of the car just went through the crust. Headlights were buried, and this was about 11 o'clock at night. Pitch black, midges everywhere, biting like mad. I thought, what am I going to do? And I noticed there was a farm down the road about 3/4 of a mile, and it had a light on. I thought if I dashed down, and maybe use the phone. So I went down, and they were kind enough to let me use the phone, explain what had happened. And I have a friend who had a 4-wheel drive vehicle. Fortunately, he wasn't in bed, and he came out. We tried to actually pull the car out the way it had gone in, backwards, and the suction peat was just holding it. It couldn't move it. So he put his vehicle in front, and we thought if we put the rope through the 2 doors, the driver's side, and tie it in front of the windscreen, and then hook it on the top of his vehicle, it'll pull the car up as well as forwards. Well, I got in, to steer it, and the creaking and groaning. I thought the windscreen was going to come out. It really did. I thought the front of the car was going to disappear. Anyway, it came out, and we got it back onto the road. Took the rope off. It looked all right, And then I noticed these 2 big grooves, one in each door, where the rope had been round. It had crushed the door in. It's perfectly matching both sides, The door's still closed, all right. But that wasn't the end of it. I took it to the garage the next day, because, I needed 2 new doors. Explained to the guy in the garage what had happened, and it was really serious, deadpan face. And he says, "You're lucky," he says, "the assessor's here at the moment." He says, "I'll just go through and have a word with him." So off he goes. I could hear all this chuckling, roars of laughter and such like, and he came back in about 20 minutes later, deadpan face again. He says, "Yeah, the assessor says that they'll pick up the bill for the repair." But I think they had such a good laugh.
There was a man came from America, Mark. He's an artist, Mark somebody or other. And they had a big do at the Newcastle, the warehouse along the quay in Newcastle. They were putting displays in there, and they were had their own individual displays in the warehouse. And he came here and he asked me, through Colin Whitman, if I could put bees in for a skeleton. He brought it from America with him. And what he did was this part here, the head and down to here, the torso, he waxed it all over, completely waxed it, the throat, everything. And it went in through the mouth, down there, and he had a little compartment there to put the bees in. And then he put the legs and everything on when he took it to the warehouse, of course. And he came over here, would I put bees in it for him? So we did. I put bees. It was lying in my garden. I said, I'll be brought up here. We left them to settle. It was there where the BBC came out and did a thing on it, in the garden. And once it was fully settled and everything, and he got the warehouse ready, he took it over there and he had it in a room. And he'd bricked the window up with blocks of wax. Bricks, proper bricks he made out of wax. It must have cost him a fortune. Left a hole in the middle like that, and the bees were coming out the mouth and going out the window. And his idea was that the old caretaker had died and the bees had taken his body over. It was on the Late Show, it was on BBC Two. I've still got a video of it, like, you know, and it just showed you them over the garden, the daft devils that come out there, cameramen and that, because I lent them veils that they were dancing about with veils on, and they were over there and they made like a documentary of it and everything. It was when I was in the garden festival, like we were on the committee and we were wanting bees in the garden, like a Gateshead Garden Festival. We wanted bees on display in the garden, like an observation hive, and they wouldn't do it. They said it was too risky. So to show how docile he was, the Daily Mirror asked us if I would do it. They sent a photographer out and over the garden, and there was myself, Ken Clark, and Colin Waitman. They were there just in case anything went wrong. And that really, one of them really docile hives of New Zealand, I ran them up, I put a queen under my jaw in a little cage, row of honey around there, and then I blocked my ears and my nose and that, you know. And I ran them, we ran them up there and onto the chest and onto my face, and they formed a perfect bee and beautiful. It was really hot, but I never got stung once. It was brilliant. Why he wanted us to read the book, I don't know. He just said, could you read a book while you were doing it? I said, that's up to you, whichever way you wanted, you know. And they did, you know, there was somewhere around about 10,000 bees on the chin. It was brilliant.
"40-odd years ago, late August, dark, miserable, wet evening, and Father, Willie Hall, Father as we called him, said to me, come on, I think we'll go to Geltdale and have a look at the bees. I said, you can't go a night like this. Dull, going dark. I said, oh, he said, I'm not going to look into the hives. I just want somebody to help me lift them to see how much honey they're making, because the weight of the hives was the name of the game with Father, bees or honey. So, full of trepidation, we set off. I was full of trepidation. Covered in all the gear, the veil, the gloves, dressed like an astronaut. Father, a tatty old veil tucked into his shirt neck, no gloves, loped over the wall, 8 hives. And I remember he said, we'll lift this one first, the end hive. So we picked it up, and as we lifted it, I could hear the bees inside. The buzz was enormous, and by the time we put it back on the stand, it was vibrating, and I thought, there's a lot of mad bees in there. However, Father was delighted with the weight, went to the next hive, picked it up, the same again, but by the time we got to the 3rd hive, the bees were coming out of the first one like a cloud of smoke, just like you see it in comics. And they came down, and damn, they missed Father, and they came straight for me, and I was covered head to toe in bees. He was standing there, laughing. I was over that wall like a scalded cat, smoke going into the car, and I thought, it's the bees or me. Eventually, I got the bees off. Father came back over the wall, and he said, right, we'll call it a day. I'm quite happy they're making plenty of honey. We'll go home. Well, now, anybody that's been to Geltdale will know that coming down off the fell is a very steep, very bendy road. And Father was driving his Morris Traveller, and we got set off, and we were going along, and we came down, and Father reached forward and scratched his ankle. And then another half mile further on, he grabbed his knee, and I thought, there's something wrong here. And a bit further, going down a very steep, bendy bit of road, he let go of the wheel and grabbed the top of his breeks. And I thought, oh, desperate. So I grabbed the steering wheel, kept the car on the road. Father was struggling with his brake. He said, I've got it, I've killed it. Thank goodness for that. So I gave him the steering wheel back, and we got home. I thought the end of the story, but no. Apparently, he thought he'd killed the bee, but it was in his underpants. And that night when he went to bed, the bee went into bed with him and stung Mother.